Now Stacy will share her message with us.
Thank you so much, Asia. And I really love that you interpreted the phone booth for everyone who doesn't remember. Today's message, The Spirit of Generosity, is brought to you by the month of December. Let me explain. About halfway through seminary, one of my classmates shared that he was really struggling. He wasn't sure if he wanted to continue because he had realized that his job as an aspiring minister was to share hope and inspiration every single week. When in reality, as a single father, as a person of mixed race who grew up without connections to his Native American heritage, as somebody who was a lower income person, he said that every week he could give a message about injustice, about gender inequality for both raising a young daughter and being a single dad. He said he could give one on racism, on selfishness every single week. What hope, what inspiration am I supposed to pull from? He asked our class. I made the comment, oh, it'd be so much easier to do this job if every month was like December, when people are just bursting into random choruses, singing chorals to each other, when people just are giving presents, even at work, even to the colleagues that they don't like, when people help each other, when there's goodwill just everywhere around us. 42% of giving goes up in December. Wouldn't it be easy if we just had to talk during that month? I was saying it like a joke, but the whole class paused and looked at one another, and then we started telling stories of December. Now, we were an eclectic group. There were many different generations in age. There was also Christian, Jewish, Baha'i, and UU traditions, as well as those who were studying to be interfaith chaplains that came from possibly spiritually fluid backgrounds. Yet we all had this in common. Each of us did want to give credit to our particular religious tradition. Go, baby Jesus! It must be the magic of the winter solstice. Could be the menorah. And the humanists, it's the tax incentives. But none of us could claim December as our own. The conversation almost became comical as we realized that it was absurd to think that the spirit of goodwill and that generosity literally had a season. But everyone had experienced it as such. So ever since that day in class, I have been researching, reading, being in conversation to explore why. And today I hope to share a little bit about what I've learned. So first of all, this word spirit of generosity, it can mean, broadly, like someone's in the spirit of generosity, they're being generous. But also the spirit of generosity has become a coined phrase with the common characteristics of number one, giving that has no expectation of return, sometimes referred to as kindness. An abundance mindset. So that reading that Asia did to set up this message, that's it. Brene Brown in her book, Daring Greatly, shares that the opposite of scarcity is not abundance. It is enough. So it's a bit ironic that an abundance mindset comes from a sense that I have enough. When I embrace that I have enough, I know that I can share. I can share from my plate, even if it's a sacrifice, because I don't need to hoard out of scarcity. And three, the spirit of generosity is non-judgmental or conditional. So it happens outside of the places where we often see it, like in a family or in an in-group, people that look like me, people who live by me. So it's non-conditional. It's a sense of solidarity amongst all, sometimes referred to as compassion. And generosity, it resembles the root word of the term charity. Now, charity kind of has a bad connotation. It often means, giving to someone less fortunate, and that has this whole power dynamic. But in its original form, the Latin charitas, it comes from that sense of agape love, divine love. And Thomas Aquinas, who was a reverend and who lived in the 13th century, was famous for using that idea of charity and charitas as the practice of divine love expressed as friendship. So it's a love that might often be reserved for the divine amongst one another. So that is what's called the spirit of generosity. Now, where does it come from? Does everybody have it? These are all really good questions. The John Templeton Foundation in 2016 did this meta study, which means they looked at all the individual studies on generosity, over 200 of them, to try to find and rise up what were some of the parallels. What were some of the things that could be said about generosity? Before this study, it was mainly thought that generosity was done in self-interest. We receive rewards, we receive gratitude, we receive status when we give, and that's what provokes giving. But the Templeton Foundation found that generosity is way more complex than that. And so I would like to pull up 3 things from this study that I think are really important and really have to do with this idea of generosity becoming the spirit of December. So first, human and non-human species demonstrate that generosity comes naturally to us. It's not something that's taught. Studies showed that a cold child would give an adult their blanket if the adult looked cold, and they would give their only toy to an adult that looked sad. Many cross-species between different animals have been cited in these studies as well. And from this, the Templeton Foundation essentially concluded that generosity is deeply rooted in being itself. So it's an ontological truth. To be is to be generous. One of the unique examples of generosity from this way of being often cited is about people who give a kidney or other medical donations, such as blood and plasma, to strangers. Every year, 300 people just in the United States give a kidney to a complete stranger. I just was talking with a friend at another program, and she told me about her sister. Now, I grew up knowing her sister. She lost her dad to pancreatic cancer, very similar to how I lost my dad. I've always had a connection to this young lady, and then she was raised by this amazing stepfather, and he just passed away from leukemia. And so this young lady has had so much loss in her life. While her stepfather was going through leukemia, she put her bone marrow into the registry to see if she would match to be a donor for him, and she wasn't, and nobody was. But it just turns out that she happened to match with a 77-year-old in New York whose life depends on a bone marrow transplant. She was given a message that this was happening and asked if she would want to donate. Now, this is a 20-year-old in college, working, has a lot going on in her life, and she just put everything on hold. And she has been doing the immunity therapy. She's been going to the doctor's offices, and now she's flying out to New York to do this bone marrow donation. And it's quite an amazing thing to watch her receiving the joy that goes into knowing that she can make a difference when so much had been out of her control, watching her loved ones going through cancer treatment. So it is just an amazing thing to witness this young adult giving to this elder that she doesn't know, and both are holding tight to that interconnected web of life. Generosity in this form is absolutely part of survival. We know that, but it's not just about one's own survival. That's shown again and again. It seems to say that we are relational beings, that we know that it is more important to think about we than me, that it's our whole species and all species thriving, not just surviving, that we are geared towards evolutionarily, biologically. It's of our being. A second conclusion that I want to share from this study is that even though that type of giving has no expectation of return, that it's deeply rooted in us, generosity does benefit everyone. Now, generous behavior activates the same reward pathways in our brains that's triggered by things like chocolate and sex, a correlation that may help explain why giving and helping feel good, no matter what the amount is, no matter how it's done. So this is what's often called pro-social behavior, and it often looks like volunteership. Now, volunteering has had a lot of study done on it. It's kind of amazing when you look at that research. People who volunteer on a regular basis, on average, live longer, are happier, and have less burnout, have better relationships with one another, and often talk about having a higher well-being in their life. Volunteership really tanked during the pandemic, but it is on the rebound. More than 75.7 million people, or about 28% of Americans, formally volunteered, so trackable through an organization. And obviously, there's much, much more than that. But in tracking that, we can see that it's a $4.99 billion service that volunteers provided just last year. So that is a $167.2 billion worth of economic value. And that's about the equivalent of the GDP of Ukraine or Hungary, countries in that category. So kind of amazing what volunteering can do, what it's literally running. You think about it, it's like it's beat in this American country we're in. Now, I had a personal story with volunteership. I've been part of this Adopt a Family program before, and it's kind of this multi-agency collaboration in the Chequamegon area. And the Chequamegon UU Fellowship didn't participate this year, but I got a last-minute request. A family had been added. They just lost everything, literally everything in a fire. And so I just kind of took this leap of faith, and I was like, I'll do it. Now, it was my day off. And if you know me, my day off is like screen free. I go outdoors. I spend time with people. I have conversations. I spend a lot of time on screens. So it's really an important part of my value system. But in this case, I just thought it's my day off. I'm going on the screens. I'm going to organize this. And so I organized kind of a multi-faith, and it was a big deal. It just happened last week. We had 24 hours to meet the essential needs of a family with 5 children, and parents and adult children. And literally, we were just trying to get them shored up with basic needs before the holidays when everything was shut down. You can imagine this past week, how many food shelves, how many agencies, how much where you would go for your support just weren't open. People weren't there. They were on vacation. They were doing things with their families. So of course, there just needed to be a very fast response. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I got a box, I sent it out to different groups, and I kind of waited to see what would happen. And within 6 hours, 24 people showed up in my office, and they filled every single essential need on that list. The family literally had everything they asked for. I couldn't have fit another Tide detergent in my car. I literally could not fit anything else in my car. It was packed to the brim. And I still had a little bit of extra money that had been donated in addition to all of the things. And so I got in touch with the family and said, what about your spirit? How are you doing? I don't know what your holidays are, but what could help right now? And the woman said, I have grandkids, and I just would love to have a little tabletop tree to put their presents under. And I just, just to set on the table, but they're all gone. You don't happen to have one, or someone doesn't have one that we could borrow, do they? And we went to a local greenhouse, and they had these on display, and they, gave us a deal on one, and we were able to drive that down last weekend and meet the family and give them this little Christmas tree. So in addition to all these essential needs, they had this little spiritual kind of and love gift. And it was just, I think it was that kind of pushed it all over the edge. The amazing response of generosity that I experienced in that moment was truly priceless. It was like seeing it as a liquid being poured out. And it really had a beautiful way of restoring one's faith in the world. So generosity is deeply rooted. It's, gives to both those who receive and those who give. And I can tell you, by being part of this kind of little miracle here, it really did give back to me, and it gave back to my husband too. He said it was the most like holiday spirit that he felt this entire month. And finally, the third thing I wanted to pull out is that generosity is generative. Now, when I think about the word generative, I like to think about the product is more than what was put into it. So if I put this much energy into it, the product is actually this much bigger. And that is part of a self-perpetuating way that generosity makes an impact. This is what one study concluded. Generosity is contagious. I just love that. Generosity is contagious. And it's interesting to think about all the ways in which generosity is reflected and happening in the world. And one question I've always wondered is, will artificial intelligence be generous? If artificial intelligence is literally being formed by all of the interactions that are happening in the intraWeb, will it be generous and evolve to have that as a fundamental part of its being? I'm really curious to know that. If we think about how generosity has evolved kind of organizationally or within the public square, until 1969, with the Tax Reform Act, there were no 501c3 charitable organizations, right? There were for-profit organizations and there were governmental organizations. And then there was like religious organizations, but there was no nonprofit sector. And in 1981, Ronald Reagan did a big shift to shift programs from government to the nonprofit sector, providing government grants to support and fund those, and giving the ability of tax benefits, and essentially created a third sector of the economy. Nonprofits today run massive amounts of the services and goods that so many of us rely on. And they have certain conditions. They don't pay taxes on the land they're on. They have to have a board of trustees as leaders, and they must publicly disclose their budget and expenditures. So this whole new sector came in. Now, giving to that sector is one of the areas that people are really concerned about. And there's been this actual generosity question. You might see it in the New York Times. It's like, generosity's on decline. Humanity's, going in the toilet. Everything is dismal. And yes, traditional giving to nonprofits has gone down. But in 2024, a Generosity Commission report came together and they coined this new phrase called the whole generosity ecosystem. And it shows that while giving to nonprofits is not just continuously going up, that it has had, a dip like in 2022, had a major dip, that there are many more less quantifiable and less traceable ways that generosity is happening. So that's part of that ecosystem. So an example is a GoFundMe. That is not something that is often tracked in terms of generosity. And how many of those have you seen this year that have just changed lives, changed families, changed organizations? Within the UUA, they have something called Faithify. It's a crowdfunding source where you can give to different causes. And I was part of a giving campaign through Faithify. It was so neat. UUs from all over the country were just giving to this cause that we had put on there, in addition to friends and family that we had cultivated and asked to give. It's also interesting, as the nonprofit sector has created this this whole industry of care, that the private sector has begun to follow suit, seeing that it's a profitable and it's also a triple bottom line. So often called social entrepreneurship, private companies now have triple bottom lines: profit, people, and the environment. So social well-being. There's something called a B Corp, which is self-certification that is incredibly rigorous, that shows social and environmental responsibility in the private sector. This organization, UU Fellowship in Chico, is a 501c3. That was something I looked for when I applied, just out of curiosity. It's not required for religious institutions, but it is an option. And if you think about this fellowship, would not exist without volunteers doing 3 to 4 times what paid staff do, and that this sector of the economy allows for that. And it also allows for paid employees to be part of this. In this country, you cannot tax or require payment for religion, which is unique in this world still today. Most congregations, such as this one, are here because of tribute and legacy gifts that are made in honor of someone, gifts from an estate after death. It's all the ways in which giving, where you plant a shade tree under which you will never sit. It's giving in faith, without certainty, but a belief that a better world is possible and that you are part of making that for generations to come. Those are the kinds of gifts that get me all choked up, because I get to see the beauty and the wonder of so many UU congregations and good things happening from that type of generosity. So December across all kinds of cultures is when you have teachings related to being generous. There are at least 29 holidays observed by 7 of the world's major religions between November 1st and January 31st. And if there's one universal across religions, it's often what's called the first rule of life, or altruism, being a good neighbor. We do this when we recognize the belovedness in ourselves and in all. Reverend Don Wheat said that the religious person is the grateful person. The grateful person is the generous person. Asia's story today couldn't have highlighted that any better. We're in the midst of what some have coined Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. I think I got that. All 3 holidays of Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa were celebrated around the same time. And all of these have gratitude and gift giving, lights and feasting as part of them. So perhaps this is part of the collective consciousness, that there's a spirit of generosity that's comes over December, and it's self-perpetuated. It feels good and it gives back. It's generative. It continues on with the little bit that's given to it. And it brings it out in us. It's there already. It's part of our being. And sometimes maybe we just need something to pull it out of us. As December comes to a close, perhaps if that is true, how do we keep the spirit of generosity going? Well, remember, like the COVID virus I have right now, giving is contagious. We know that people who see acts of generosity and compassion are more likely to give generously and be compassionate. There's new science that suggests that part of our front or our right lobe might be bigger in the brains of those who are naturally more generous. You might know these people. They just have that natural empathy about them. These people burn out. And if we can find ways to give to them, we can keep their giving going. One of the great benefits of being UU is being in fellowship with those from the Jewish religion and culture. And again, I'm often told and find them on the front lines of social justice and community care. Several have shared with me that as children, they were taught to never let the light go out, which is a Hanukkah teaching. It's a teaching that reminds us to light a candle for that which we endure and light a candle for the hope of peace. It is a beautiful, beautiful teaching, and it will honor that teaching with the song today, Light One Candle, by Peter, Paul, and Mary. So as you're going forward, I hope you are feeling a sense of proanoia. During this season, when the nights grow longer, when we are more confined indoors and things slow down, all over the world, festivals of light and giving evolved. Perhaps it was because we had time to orient ourselves to the generosity that lives within us. May we all light one more candle today. Blessings on your December. May it be so. Amen.